Swadika. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. My name is Suchaya Mokkhasen, UNODC Programme Officer for Thailand. Welcome everyone here and welcome to all our viewers online to the announcement of the UNODC's new report on synthetic drugs in East and Southeast Asia, latest development and challenges 2022. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We have a very interesting briefing today, as we all know that organized crime groups in East and Southeast Asia have taken advantages of the flexibility in manufacturing synthetic drugs, including the NPS, and the market in the regions continue to expand through 2021. And before we start, I would like to request everyone here to kindly wear masks. If you're not eating or drinking, please, thank you. I would like to briefly introduce the agenda. We'll have the opening remarks delivered first by Mr. Jeremy Douglas, UNODC Regional Representative for Southeast Asia and the Pacific, followed by Mr. Thanakorn Kaiyanunta, Deputy Secretary General of the Office of Narcotics Control Board of Thailand. Then Ms. Kavinvadee Suppapongtevasakul, UNODC Regional Synthetic Drugs Analyst for the Global Smart Program, will deliver a briefing on major findings of the report before ending with a Q&A session. For your information, for those who join online, we have people following the comments on the Facebook live stream, so please feel free to type your question at any time, and if time allows, they will be answered following the briefing on the report. Without further ado, I would now like to invite Mr. Jeremy Douglas for his opening remarks, please.
Thanks, Suchaya. Mr. Deputy Secretary General, colleagues from POPASOR, Office of Narcotics Control Board, international partners, media partners, and of course my team, Kavinvadee, John, Chaya, and Inchik Sim, who's unable to be with us today because he is on a special course actually on Clan Labs. But this is our annual report. Some of you are familiar with it. We released a similar report exactly this time last year on synthetic drugs. It's crucial data for the region. It forms a baseline for the discussion that the region needs to have with itself about the drug problem that it faces. It's importantly built on data that we obtain from governments, but also from other sources across the region. And it goes through a lengthy process of verification over several months with Kavinvadee and Kun Inchik, basically where part of a larger discussion with governments where we look at the data they give us, we compare it with the numbers that their neighbors have, we also compare it with numbers that they give their neighbors, and then we look at how that jives, and then what we do is we correct it, work with them for a few months to settle on final numbers. And the numbers this year are part of a very large change that's been underway in this region for several years, in a sense, and it's really a call to action that the region has to listen to turn the situation around, because some of the numbers are quite alarming. So we'll be ready today to discuss what Kundi will present to you, and the regional context. What do those numbers truly mean in the broader scheme of things, in the broader picture here within this region, but also the verification process of the data and the supplementary sources, and how we can confidently speak to the situation given what we will be presenting. And very importantly, hopefully, we have a bit of discussion about where do we go from here as a region with Thailand, with POPASOR, with ONCB, with the Mekong Group of States, with ASEAN, and with international partners, regarding the organized crime and trafficking that Suchaya mentioned, but also with regard to chemicals, with regards to information development, demand, in fact, but also overall policy and reforms. So with that, I will turn it to my colleague, the Deputy Secretary General, for some remarks. Thank you.
Mr. Jeremy Douglas, UNODC Regional Representative for Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Office of the Narcotics Control Board, it is my honor to deliver opening remarks in the announcement of the annual UNODC Synthetic Drug Report for East and Southeast Asia today. First of all, I would like to congratulate UNODC for the success in your efforts keeping on doing an annual regional report, providing an overview of the diversifying and growing regional synthetic drug market. I believe that it is beneficial to not only member states, but also interested foreign correspondents for better understanding of the current situation of synthetic drugs. Thailand realized that the manufacture of synthetic drugs in the Golden Triangle and the Mekong sub-region is evolving rapidly due to the development of drug syndicates business models and trafficking methods, resulting in the expansion of the synthetic drug market in and beyond the regions. We are also well aware of the rising challenge of non-controlled precursors and designer precursors used in the manufacture of synthetic drugs, ephedrine and P2P, remaining primary precursors in methamphetamine manufacture. However, the number of precursor scissors remain limited in these regions. In addition, newly identified new psychoactive substances also increasing every year. In Thailand, methamphetamine trafficking remains one of our priorities since large quantity of methamphetamine are smuggled across the border of Thailand, the north and the northeast. The number of seizures of methamphetamine in Thailand is on the rise from about 368 million tablets in 2020 to 592 million tablets in 2021, resulting in high prevalence drug use throughout the country. However, the number of seizures of crystal meth is decreasing from 25,000 kilograms in 2020 to 22,000 kilograms in 2021 approximately. We believe that the supply of amphetamine is massive and ready to flow into the market, resulting from the high competition, lower cost, and oversupply. The overall supply of drugs are lower or stable, but the purity remains stable or decreases. We also found new physical appearance and package of methamphetamine with different patterns of logo and symbols that represent the branding of each drug syndicate. The forensic information can support us to understand more about the complexity of the synthetic drug market. This year, we found a new cocktail drug, so-called Happy Water, made by a combination of MDMA, ketamine, methamphetamine, and diazepam. Ecstasy and cocktail drugs or club drugs become more popular at night spots. In conclusion, Thailand fully commits to address these challenges. Since 9 December 2021, the new narcotic code has been effective. We have been adopting the new approach of health-based drug policy to address the drug problem. For supply reduction with cooperation among agencies concerned, including logistic companies, we can successfully detect and identify the drug syndicates exploiting different modus operandi, including trafficking drugs via air freight, online platform, postal service, and concealing drugs in sea cargo shipments. We have been also identifying efforts in drug-related assets for forfeiture with the target of 10,000 million baht to disrupt the flow of the illicit drug economy. Before closing, I wish to express our appreciation to the contribution the Global Smart Program of UNODC and the Regional Office for Southeast Asia and the Pacific in providing us with a scientific and informative report every year. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General. And next is the briefing on major findings of the report. Kavinvadee, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure today to present our latest annual report on the synthetic drug situation in East and Southeast Asia. As Kun Jeremy mentioned previously, as part of our analysis of the work, we have an ongoing dialogue with national drug agencies in the region over the past year, and also especially over the past several months in the lead up to the report. And we also cross-check this information with our intel, with our own monitoring of the situation, with other agencies in the region, such as customs, police, to make sure that we have a good picture of what is going on, and also with our regional and international partners who are affected by the flow of drugs in the region, so we can see the effects beyond just East and Southeast Asia. So today, some of the themes that we observed over the past year and that I'll be talking about over the course of the presentation is the ongoing supply of methamphetamine in East and Southeast Asia, and also the impact towards other neighboring regions like South Asia. Also the concurrent increase in demand as supply increases, as well as the developments regarding synthetic drug production that we're seeing across the Golden Triangle, Lower Mekong area, and also how forensics and early warning can contribute as we try to tackle this evolving drug situation in the region. So first, I'd like to talk about the methamphetamine that we found in 2021. In 2021, we found that there was approximately 171.5 tons seized total, compared to nearly 170 in 2020. And one of the main things that we observed was that we had, for the first time in the region, we seized over 1 billion meth tablets. So this is a really huge amount. In terms of tablets, it might be hard to see, but if we convert it to tons, this is equivalent to about 91 tons of meth. So that's over half of the meth seized in 2021 was meth tablets. This in comparison to just 78 tons in 2020. So we can see that the meth tablet production has been really growing over the past year. In terms of crystal meth, it remained rather flat compared to last year. There wasn't that much of a change. And as you can see, over the past several years, you've seen an increasing proportion of meth seized in Southeast Asia, from 84% in 2020 and through this year to 88%. And most of these seizures were actually in the Lower Mekong subregion. So we seized about 74% of the total amount. This is rather alarming because if you look at the population in the Lower Mekong subregion, it's only about 10% of the population in the region, but they seized 74% of the total amount of meth. And part of this is because the production of methamphetamine is consolidated in the Golden Triangle, specifically Shan State, Myanmar, which is why we're seeing a lot of seizures in this subregion. In terms of East Asia, over the past, from 2020 to 2021, the seizures dropped by about 24%, from around 25.5 tons in 2020 to 19.5 tons in 2021. Here, just so you can see a picture of the changes in meth seizures across the region over the past year. You can see that in the Lower Mekong subregion, there was a decrease in Myanmar by quite a significant amount, by about 17 tons. But what you can also see is that there was an increase in neighboring countries. For example, Laos seized about 8 tons more. Thailand also seized about 17 tons more, nearly compensating the amount that Myanmar seized. We also have increases in Cambodia. And for other countries down the line, there were increases in Singapore, Indonesia, the Philippines. Here it says that Malaysia has a decrease. And what I want to highlight here is that even though for Malaysia there was a decrease, this was largely due to a drop in liquid meth seizures that went from 6 tons to just about 100-something kg. But if you look at crystal meth and meth tablets seized in Malaysia, they were both record amounts in 2021. So Malaysia seized the highest amount of meth tablets and crystal meth on record for their country in 2021. So you can see that there has been a spillover of methamphetamine from Myanmar to these neighboring countries and these other countries that transit meth from the region also beyond to Australia, New Zealand, for example. And again, I want to highlight again the record amount of meth tablets seized in 2021 that were predominantly in the Lower Mekong, predominantly in Lao PDR, Thailand, and Myanmar. When I say 1 billion, the exact number is about 1,000,000,007,000,000. So that's quite a significant amount. If you compare it to 10 years ago, that you can see here, that 10 years ago it was just about 143 million. And if you go back 20 years ago, it was about 28 million. So you can see from 28 million 20 years ago to over 1 billion in 2021. That is a really drastic increase of meth tablets seized. The Deputy Secretary General already mentioned this, but for Thailand, there was an increase from 368 million tablets in 2020 to 592 million in 2021. But if you look at Laos also, Laos in 2020, they seized only 18 million tablets, but in 2021, they seized 143 million tablets. So that is an increase of nearly 7 times, just for meth tablets alone in Lao PDR. In connection with this, one of the things that we highlighted actually last year was increasing drug flow and transiting through and to Lao PDR. And we saw that again in 2021, that organized crime groups are continuing to target Lao PDR for the transit of methamphetamine and other drugs. If you can see on the map here, there were a large number of seizures in Bac Kao province, which borders both Myanmar and Thailand. It's to the left of the map, if you can see there. But also we have seizures that are in Sayaburi, which also borders Thailand, and also Vientiane, which again borders Thailand. And looking at data regarding methamphetamine that was seized in the northeastern border between Thailand and Lao PDR, we saw that once again there was an increase in the amount of both meth tablets and crystal meth seized in this particular region. So we can see that Lao PDR is being used to reroute methamphetamine, which before used to come from Myanmar directly into Thailand, and now we've been seeing more from Myanmar to Lao PDR, and then from Lao PDR into Thailand. I also want to highlight that for Lao PDR, it's not only for methamphetamine that we're seeing Lao PDR used, though we have seen New Zealand also reported increasing parcel shipments of methamphetamine from Lao PDR, but also the Republic of Korea reported that they had Lao PDR being the embarkation point for ketamine as well. So it's not only methamphetamine that's being trafficked through the country. Here I want to showcase one of the large seizures that occurred in Laos last year. This was in October 2021 in Bac Kao province, which I mentioned borders Myanmar and Thailand. And in this case, 55.6 million meth tablets were seized, along with 1.5 kg of 1.5 tons of crystal meth. This is a huge amount, and from information that we have from sources in the region, they indicated that tableting of methamphetamine also occurred as part of this case as well in Laos. And again, speaking of methamphetamine tablets, one of the interesting things that we observed, and also this is thanks to ONCB for keeping track of this sort of information, is the wide variety of meth packaging that is rather unprecedented for this region. In 2020, usually the meth packaging that we seize in the region, the majority of it is the one that's branded 999. As you can see from the pictures, it says 999, but there are of course some little variations to the design, but the main marking on it is 999. Some other ones that we see are Y1, and some other ones are also 12 that you can see. But in terms of other branding on methamphetamine tablet packaging that we've seen, in 2020 it was just about 13%, but this jumped to 3% in 2020, and it jumped to 13% in 2021. So what this indicates is that there are more groups tableting in 2021 than in any previous year on record. And of course, that being said, Shan State, Myanmar, as I mentioned before, is still the main source, the primary source of meth in the region for both methamphetamine tablets and also crystal meth. And we know this because when we look at seizures that are occurring in other countries in the region, there is a dominance of tea bag packaging, which you can see here in the bottom right. Some pictures of the tea bag packaging that we see. The most common ones are the golden guaningwang, and also the guaningwang is also in green, and also Qingshan that we also see in the region. And these are the sort of things that we see not only in the lower Mekong sub-region, but also seizures in the Philippines. We also see them in this sort of packaging. We also know that Myanmar continues to be the main source because they continue to seize both controlled and non-controlled chemicals which can be used in the manufacture of methamphetamine and other synthetic substances. However, while Myanmar remains the primary source of meth in the region, and we mentioned this last year as well, we have been seeing synthetic drug production expanding to Cambodia. And we saw some labs in last year and also some labs this year that may have been also used to manufacture methamphetamine. Also of note is the rising amount of controlled and non-controlled chemicals seized in Cambodia just over the past, from 2019 to this year. You can see in 2020 there were about 5 tons of chemicals seized, and then in 2021 it was about 62 tons. And just in January alone of this year, there were 165 tons of chemicals seized in Cambodia in 3 warehouses. So you can see this is a large jump in the number of controlled chemicals and controlled and non-controlled chemicals that we're seeing seized in Cambodia. And one of the substances that was found in January of this year in one of the warehouses was 2.57 tons of the controlled chemical acetic anhydride. And this chemical can be used to manufacture P2P, which is a precursor for methamphetamine, and also PMK, which is a precursor for MDMA. So you can see that the substances that they have are not necessarily just for one drug, but they can be used to produce several different types of substances. And then just to show the flows of crystal meth in the region, as you can see in the map, most of it is coming from Myanmar, and throughout the region through Thailand, through Laos, down to Vietnam, Cambodia, from Malaysia for further trafficking to Indonesia, and to Australia, New Zealand, and other countries in the region. But one of the things that we observed over the past year was further integration of the Golden Triangle meth into the Southeast Asia drug market, and also some scaled up use of East Asia as a transit for methamphetamine coming from North America, namely Mexico. As an example, one of the routes for India is, you might recall a few years ago in 2019, I think there was a seizure of 1 ton of meth, but this was from a ship, a vessel that was moving through India. What we're seeing here, over the past year is a bit different in that this one is going directly across the border. This was seized, 154 kg of crystal meth was seized in Manipur in northeastern India in December. And the difference is that for this one, we're seeing drugs being trafficked across the border from Myanmar directly through the land border into India. And this was not the only place in India that had this phenomenon. There were also seizures of crystal meth in other northeastern provinces. And here what I want to highlight is, if you can see on the left, this is a picture of the crystal meth that was seized, and it is clearly in the tea bag packaging that we observed produced in the Golden Triangle in Myanmar. In terms of Hong Kong, also we wanted to highlight, because there was this year, in March actually of this year, there was a record seizure of 700 kilograms of methamphetamine in Hong Kong. And this was not the first time. Over the past, in 2021, what we also observed was there were also several other large seizures of methamphetamine from Mexico. One of 145 kg in July, 230 kg in September, and 180 kg in October. So this has been going on throughout the year. And in this year, there was this record seizure that was seized by Hong Kong Customs at the international airport, and also follow-up investigations led to the 253 kg at the warehouse. As another point, I also mentioned before that Malaysia continues to be an important transit point for methamphetamine in the region. But also, aside from methamphetamine, it's also been used for amphetamine from the Middle East. Last year, there were several large seizures of Captagon in Malaysia, including 16 tons in March and 650 kg in April. But the interesting thing is that there is no Captagon market in the region, because we have such an abundance of methamphetamine. So what we believe is that even though these drugs transited through the area, it might have been used as a circuitous route. So it might come through Malaysia and then go back, because just to disguise where the drugs actually came from. And this is possible because of the logistic capacity of Malaysia, which is being used for, for meth and also for these other drugs. Another thing we would like to highlight is that the price of meth decreased again in 2021 compared to 2020. If you look at the wholesale price of crystal meth here for Malaysia and Thailand, in Malaysia it dropped from about 12,000 US dollars per kilogram to just about 8,500 in 2021. And for similarly in Thailand, it dropped from about 10,000 something 2 years ago to just 5,000 something this year for the typical price, which is nearly half of what it used to be 2 years ago. So you can see even in just these 2 years, there's been a significant decrease in the price of crystal meth in the region. And this is concerning because if you look at meth purity in the region, it's still very high. So this means that there is increased affordability to high quality and high purity meth for users. As you mentioned, methamphetamine, is the primary drug of concern in the region. And over the years, as you've seen the supply of methamphetamine increase, you've also seen that there's been an increasing proportion of methamphetamine users across several countries in the region, from Brunei, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam. You see the levels from 2011, 2015 to 2021. You see that there has been an increasing proportion of methamphetamine users throughout these years. And of course, this is possible because if you're looking at the amount of meth that is seized across the region year on year, whether with the increases year on year, we believe that this would not be possible if there were not also increases in demand for the drug, because otherwise it would not be sustainable. But that being said, demand data in the region is still a bit limited. There are some countries do not monitor or study demand closely, so it is possible that demand is actually seriously underestimated. And there might be a lot more demand than we are thinking for these large volumes of meth to be coming through. And again, to highlight the clear shift, the drastic change in the region for the market towards methamphetamine. In 2010, there were only about 6 countries reporting that methamphetamine was the main drug of concern in the region, and compared to last year, the latest year available, all reporting countries that we work with, 13 countries that we work with, reported methamphetamine as the primary drug of concern. Now, we have this large supply of methamphetamine in the region, but one of the things that keeps on cropping up is what are the precursor chemicals? How is it possible for all this methamphetamine to be produced when we're seeing very low seizures of ephedrine and P2P? If you look at the latest data for 2021, this is actually very concerning because there were only 6 kg of ephedrine seized across East and Southeast Asia in 2021 and 0 kg actually of P2P. So over the past year, we practically didn't seize any of the main precursors at all. What we believe this is, one of the reasons for this is because of the increased use in non-controlled substances that can be used to make these precursors. Because if we look at the forensic profiles of crystal meth in Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand, the majority of methamphetamine is still produced using ephedrine and pseudoephedrine or P2P-based methods. But still, as I mentioned before, where are they then? Where is ephedrine and where is pseudoephedrine? And again, this is, with the non-controlled substances, one of the difficulties is that because some of them can also be used for illicit uses, it requires a lot of monitoring and a lot of understanding by counterparts in the region, law enforcement agencies in the region, frontline officers, to understand what chemicals are coming through, what these chemicals could be used for, if they could also be used for synthetic drug production. And so we need a lot more understanding on that for people to be able to disrupt the supply chain of methamphetamine. Aside from methamphetamine, one of the other markets we have here is for ecstasy, which is it's a lot smaller than it is for methamphetamine, admittedly, but it's still one of the synthetic drugs that we seize in the region. In 2021, there was a decrease in the ecstasy tablets that we seized from an equivalent of 9 million tablets to only 3.7 million in 2021. But what we continue to observe is that a lot of these ecstasy tablets contain a high content of MDMA. And also in the region, we see a lot of ecstasy tablets that have substances other than MDMA present as well. For example, we've seen some tablets with diazepam and methamphetamine, MDMA with other new psychoactive substances, some tablets with ketamine and meth. And also, interestingly, in Thailand, this tablet that we see here was seized with no MDMA at all, which is surprising for a tablet that is marketed as ecstasy. So we've seen quite a variety in the MDMA tablets, ecstasy tablets that we see in the region. And as mentioned already by the Deputy Secretary General as well, we've seen more products, more synthetic drug products. And one of them was Happy Water that was seized in Thailand earlier this year. And the interesting thing is that for the MDMA that is found, for the Happy Water that was found in Thailand, it contains quite a mix of different substances from MDMA, methamphetamine, diazepam, caffeine, tramadol, ketamine. But if you look at the profile here of the Happy Water powder that was seized, you can see that these two are quite different in content. The first one had just 2.26% of MDMA and 5.4% of ketamine, but the second sample also had 46% methamphetamine and 24% diazepam. So what we can see here is that there is no real quality control when it comes to what kind of synthetic drug products are produced. These are both marketed as Happy Water, but the content is rather different. So we can see that in cases like this, forensic analysis is very important to be able to understand what sort of substances are being seized throughout the region and what sort of substances organized crime groups are producing and marketing to appeal to drug users. And also I want to highlight, this is also a great example of early warning by Thai authorities because they released an announcement actually that Happy Water was found in the region, warning people that this drug was found and could be of potentially significant harm to people who might be using them. In terms of NPS, new psychoactive substances, this includes like quite a few different substances such as synthetic cannabinoids, synthetic cathinones, synthetic opioids, which is a problem in some regions. And what we observed in East and Southeast Asia is that the number of individual new psychoactive substances that we found each year has been decreasing in terms of different types of NPS that we find. But even though they have been decreasing, there have been new NPS that have been identified each year. And for this region, the dominant one is synthetic cannabinoids. We found synthetic cannabinoids form the majority of NPS that are uncovered in China, in Singapore, in Indonesia, and in Vietnam, for example. And even despite legal controls that we have for NPS, because the chemical structures are very easy to change, what we often find is that as we have legal controls for one substance, then a slight change will happen to it and it will become a different substance, and that substance is the one that is marketed in the region. So once again, early warning and forensics are very important to be able to identify these new substances that are being found in the region. Also, ketamine is also considered under the umbrella of NPS, and what we found over the past year is a growing supply of ketamine in East and Southeast Asia. If we look at the amount of ketamine seized, there were about 10.2 tons seized in 2021 compared to 9.2 in 2020, so an increase of about 1 ton. And this was primarily due to seizures in Hong Kong, China, which seized 3.2 tons, and Cambodia, which seized 2.8 tons. And what I want to highlight here again is the expansion of illicit ketamine manufacture to Cambodia. I talked about Cambodia earlier before about synthetic drug production and the source of uncontrolled and uncontrolled chemicals that were seized. But here is one of the industrial scale laboratories that was found for ketamine. This was found in December 2021. There was a seizure of 1.4 tons of ketamine in Sihanoukville, Cambodia, and from investigations from that is what led to the seizure of the dismantling of this lab, the ketamine lab. At this lab, there were 61.7 tons seized at the site, including about 750 kilograms of ketamine, but also 13.2 tons of ethyl benzoate and 25 tons of hydrochloric acid, which can be used for the manufacture of ketamine. And going on from this, further investigation of this is what leads to the finding of the warehouses in January with those substances. So you can see the scale of the synthetic drug manufacture in Cambodia seems to be growing over the past year, and also for a range of substances, not just one particular one, but several. So once again, just to highlight some of the things that we find in the report, and if you have a look at the report, there will be more details in it, and also some information specifically by country, is that there was no disruption to the supply of methamphetamine in the region, and the spillover of methamphetamine from Myanmar to other neighboring countries can be observed also in the seizures that we see in the countries close to Myanmar. There have been increases in the demand for methamphetamine over the past decade, even though data is still rather limited, and the control of chemicals, especially non-controlled chemicals, and increasing understanding of these chemicals is very crucial for us to be able to disrupt the supply of methamphetamine in the region. And also, as I mentioned before, forensics and early warning are also very important so that we can keep pace with the evolving drug situation. So that's it from me. If I can hand the floor back to Chaya, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dee. So, like Dee said, we have heard that large methamphetamines continue to be seized in East and Southeast Asia. And like Kun Dee mentioned, that over 1 billion tablets were seized for the first time in this region. So I think we can say that the methamphetamine market has proven highly resilient to the impact of COVID-19 and also other recent developments as well. And another thing is that the porous border in these regions facilitate not only the movement of drugs across the territory, but also control and uncontrolled chemical as well to illicit manufacturing sites. And the last thing on this note is that I think it's fair to say that forensic have become more and more important as the synthetic drugs market in these regions have adapted and evolved. So I think now I would like to dive into Q&A sessions, and for those of you who's here and has questions, please feel free to use the microphone at the back of the rooms. And I'd like to remind again for those joining online, you can send in your question through the comment sections on your viewing platform. So. I would like to request for you to wait a few seconds because we are going to start with the online question that we received during the presentations first, quickly. Thank you very much. I think the first questions, let me check. All right, so 1 billion tablets is a huge amount. What does that amount represent in the region, and how is it possible to engineer such an increase in production? Please, I think, Kun Jeremy? All right, please.
What does it represent? I think, good question. Frankly, you have to be a little careful with seizure numbers to over-interpret them, but clearly what we see in front of us is a massive supply that has been pushed over the course of the past year. I think one of the most interesting things that came out was the 13%. So part of that 1 billion, suddenly there was an escalation of, what was that, 4 to 5 times the amount which is produced in a normal year by small groups in Myanmar, suddenly became 13%. So there was an opportunity seized over the course of last year, after February of last year, by small groups to suddenly produce methamphetamine, crank up the tableting. The other thing, though, to look at the 1 billion, the profile of the methamphetamine that is tableted is largely the same, which means it comes out of big producers, which in turn sell to small tableters the bulk powder to produce. So we do have that behind the business as well. I think the other interesting thing about the billion is what does it represent in percentage terms. When we look at the region and the capacity of this region to seize and interdict, it does not have the capacity of other regions like Europe and North America. The only comparable region in the world that seizes such a volume of methamphetamine is North America, primarily, of course, in the United States, coming in from Mexico. But it is not conceivable that Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Malaysia, the countries of this region, have anywhere near the capacity of the United States. So if the two amounts are roughly similar, that does tell you that the amounts moving here are likely larger. But that said, the population here is also multiple times larger, many, many times larger. So the population base and therefore the demand and the consumption pattern can be quite different than it is in other regions of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're just going to take the question that we received online first. The second question, given the situation in Myanmar and the claim that some ethnic armed groups are making seizures themselves, does the data reported by Myanmar really reflect the total seized?
Good question. Full caveat on the 171.5 tons. I think we have to be honest with you, that's the minimum amount that was seized in the region. That's what we know was seized. There was nothing reported from Myanmar, as our friends at ONCB as well know, and other international partners. There was nothing reported for about 4 months from February to May of 2021. So there's a gap in time when there was no information forthcoming in relation to the seizures in that country that could have been made in that country. At the same time, though, Laos and Thailand were making big seizures right around them. And we know from China as well that seizures were being made at that time. So it's not like things suddenly stopped. So that 171.5 would be the minimum. At the same time, there are groups in Myanmar claiming to make seizures themselves, but we cannot verify those.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just going to dive to the next one. It was mentioned that there was more variety in meth tablet packaging in 2021. Where is it coming from and who is involved?
Do you want to take that? I can take it. Okay.
Sure.
Well, I think I've already answered that. The 13% was from different small groups that were tableting last year. And there's the two big groups, they're grouped together, northern tableters and southern tableters, the 999 and the Y1 group. But you have suddenly all these little tableting operations that were cranked up last year with 13% of that 1 billion seized representative of their production, which is quite concerning because I think what that tells us is that there was a moment in time when groups decided to seize it, be opportunistic, produce and traffic primarily into places like Thailand or through Laos to Thailand. So you have this sudden jump in production from those small groups. And of course, they're continuing that here in 2022 as well.
Thank you. If you allow, I was just going to take this few questions from online and then we open the floor here. Meth is the primary drug in the region, but there are also these new and or other synthetic drugs like ketamine. Who is it all for? Maybe you can.
Yes, I can answer this question. Actually, the truth is we don't really know. It's hard to say because there isn't a lot of study on these other synthetic drugs in the region since methamphetamine is the main one. But especially for ketamine, we see that there is, as I mentioned in the report, we see production in Cambodia. In Hong Kong, we've also seen a lot of ketamine coming in from Pakistan. And several countries in the region also report increasing quantities of ketamine coming in from Europe. But we don't really have as much information on who is going to, who is using it, because the amount of data that we have on, for example, drug demand indicators that we have for methamphetamine, some of them aren't really used for ketamine and other substances as much. So while it appears that there is some sort of demand in the region because we keep on seeing, ketamine seized, keep on seeing ketamine produced, ketamine being included in these synthetic drug mixtures, we don't actually know who it's going to and how much there is in the region that is being used by people here.
Thank you, Dee. And a following question to that one. You mentioned that prices nearly halved in the past 2 years. How does that compare to the years before?
I assume this is for methamphetamine prices. It was quite a drastic drop from previous years. From information that we have from 2015, the price in 2021 for Malaysia is about a third of the price that it was in 2015. And Cambodia, we didn't mention this in the report, but from the data that we have, it was about, the wholesale price was about 30,000 to 35,000 US dollars per kg, and the latest report that they gave us for 2021 was about 7,000 US dollars per kg. So in Cambodia, we also see a drop. And for meth tablets, we also see a similar drop. Last year, I think if we look at different regions of Thailand, if we see the north of Thailand, where a lot of the meth tablets are coming in, it's about $1 per tablet, and in Bangkok, probably about $2 per tablet, compared to $10 per tablet about a decade ago. So what we can see is that organized crime groups have really been able to push supply into the region to drop these prices, also possibly lower cost of manufacture. But it's very concerning, as I mentioned during the presentation, because this means greater accessibility to the drugs, greater affordability to drugs, especially among younger people who might not have had the purchasing power before now.
Just, I'll
Yeah,
date myself
sure.
here, but when I first worked here, 2002 to 7, my first run in the region, a meth tablet was 5 times what it costs now in banks, 5-6 times what it costs now. And at that same time, we've had inflation, we've had all these various factors change the economy, and purchasing power is up. So just, it's extremely available now. Methamphetamine is much, much more available than it was then during the famous Thai war on drugs, when everybody freaked out and there was this massive campaign against methamphetamine. In fact, it's 35 times difference, the seizure level, then and now. So that's quite the change and quite the shift in availability to the street. So.
Perfect, and that kind of goes to the next question here. Like, it
Well,
seems like, sorry.
Should we take some from the audience?
Yeah, I think there's still like a few more questions from online, but I think that's all we can take from online. But I would like to open the floor here to our guest here, please.
Hello, Jerry Harmer from the AP. A question for Mr. Douglas. I'm really looking for an overall quote to sum up this situation. And my question really is, what is your reaction when you see figures like these?
When I see the figure of 1 billion pills?
Yes.
Well, I think the region is literally swimming in methamphetamine, and I think it's high time that the region take a hard look at the policy framework that it has in place to address the problem. Clearly, more of the same is not going to work. The situation is much, much more complex than it used to be, and it continues to mushroom. So there's going to have to be a radical policy shift by Southeast Asia to address this problem, or it's just going to continue to grow. Fundamentally, and there's a good move underway here in Thailand with this new drug law that they've put in place, but fundamentally, we need the region to refocus its law enforcement effort. There's lots and lots of seizures being made and no impact being made on the business itself. Organized crime just keep cranking out the volume, replacing seizures with more product. The chemical situation is highly complex. There's no essential chemicals being seized, and they just continue to flow unabated, primarily through Laos into Shan State. We also have huge money laundering operations at play in the region. We have no attempt fundamentally at the end of the day to address demand, which is seemingly growing and can continue to grow because the price point of the drug is so cheap. So there has to be a huge change in approach in this region, or it's just going to continue to get worse.
Is there any other question? Yes, please.
Hi, this is Panu from Reuters. Just a question on the sharp increase in number of seizures in Laos. I mean, I wonder, how do we read into that, like the 600% increase in terms of seizures of drugs in Laos? Does that mean that there's a new trafficking route?
I can say maybe a few words on this, and then maybe Jeremy can follow up. For Laos, as you mentioned, it's not exactly a new trafficking route. We've seen it used before in previous years as well. It's just that it's been used a lot more. And we studied it first in 2020, and we believe that was because of the strict border controls between Myanmar and Thailand during that time, during the onset of COVID. And that's when the drugs started being rerouted through Lao PDR. And for 2021, what we think is that because of these continued restrictions, continued border controls, it's easier for organized crime to reroute the drug shipments through Lao PDR and through other countries in the region. And that's why we're seeing Lao PDR being used much more frequently for these kind of drug shipments.
Actually, I think just to put that in a kind of a geographical context, which I think is very, very necessary, Thailand has very successfully reinforced its northern border with Shan State, with Myanmar, but so has China reinforced their southern border with Shan State very, very firmly over the course of the past 2 years. And if you look closely at moves that were made by China public security in the course of the past 18 months, first it was COVID, and they had a big closure of their border during COVID. Then they had, in 2021, a reinforced fencing program on their border. At the same time, we see seizures drop off a cliff in Yunnan in 2021, and massive increase in seizures in Laos. Basically, there has been a rerouting, essentially, using Laos because it's a soft target for traffickers. Very, very soft target. At the same time, if you look at the pattern of behavior, or the groups that are involved in Laos, but in Bokeo, but also in other provinces adjacent to Bokeo, you see groups from Shan State investing heavily in Laos. Essentially, if in my view, they no longer look at northern Laos and northern Myanmar as separate. They're one and the same, a common territory. So those of us that are looking at how to assist, how to address this challenge, you can't look at them as two separate sovereign states almost at this point, because you've got just basically a blurred line of territory between the two states. And addressing the problem in Shan State requires addressing it in Laos at this point in time, because the two places are almost one territory.
Tony Davis from Jane's Security and Defense Publications. I was very interested in the comments concerning production in Cambodia, production of meth. And the question is this essentially crystal meth, or are we talking yaba tablets here? And if it's crystal, which tends generally to be produced on a more centralized and more organized basis, does this reflect groups that are already operating in Shan State, possibly from the Chinese, Macau, Hong Kong, Guangdong triangle, moving into Cambodia and setting up shop there? Thank you.
Maybe Kundi can add a bit, but I just to kick it off, so far the biggest production has been, there has been some methamphetamine production, but it's been really big ketamine production. A couple of attempts at it in the course of the past year and a half, with big investment behind it. Clearly, you can see it from the photograph there. The people arrested, the profile of the people arrested are more or less as you describe, organized crime groups from outside the country. Interestingly enough, Taiwanese mixed with mainland Chinese, which is not altogether surprising, because that's exactly a similar profile to what you see in northern Myanmar as well when you look at the producers there. And why? Because they have the technical know-how and the capacity to make an investment like we saw there. Cambodia is a very, very good location, if you will, if you want to produce. It has a lot of the ingredients you need. You can easily get chemicals in and out. It's got great infrastructure to move it in and out, to move product in and out. It's got a seaport, and it also happens to have essentially a really easy way into the country. It's easy to come and go from Cambodia and make an investment like that.
So are we talking the same syndicates as in Shan State, or it's not clear, or not necessarily?
I think it's a little unclear exactly the relationship between some of the people that were involved in that particular facility and facilities in northern Myanmar, but the profile is very similar. And I think the point to make is not, are they the same group or not? It's, are the conditions necessary for a group to be successful in place in Cambodia as they are in Myanmar? The conditions are much better in Myanmar, except for the logistics, because getting it out is much more difficult. But the conditions on the ground in both states are kind of similar, and so you'd be making a safe bet making your investment in Cambodia.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. Yeah. Thanks.
First of all, thank you for the presentation, informative as always. 2 really quick questions. With the Happy Water, is that, I'm assuming, primarily only in liquid form, not pill form? And then number 2, do you think that there's a shift for chemical supply to India at all, versus now that the regulations in China are kind of becoming a little more strict, I think. Yeah.
Perhaps I can take the happy water question, and Jeremy can take the second one about chemicals from India. In terms of happy water, the happy water that is seized in Thailand is mainly in powder form, which is meant to be mixed with warm water or other drinks. I didn't mention this earlier, but happy water was actually also found in China before, and it was subsequently banned. But the happy water that we see in China comes in liquid form. So the name is the same, but the way that it's presented between China and Thailand is a bit different. In Thailand, it's mainly powder.
And to the point of the source of the chemicals, so far, the source doesn't seem to have shifted a great deal. That said, there are chemicals, yes, from India coming towards the Golden Triangle, but still the predominant source at the moment appears to be China. Although we've also seen chemicals from Vietnam seized, or some of the materials in labs in Shan State or in the region having been sourced as well there or in other countries. So, but predominantly China. But I think the bigger question that you asked, or that you got to, a point you were getting to, is on the non-controlled chemicals. Yes, China has done a very good job of addressing controlled chemicals and some of the fentanyl products, reasonable job, but the issue is that it displaces the problem and changes the problem. And there's clearly some capacities in place in northern Shan State which allow them to bypass the problem of using controlled chemicals, which are much more difficult to get their hands on than non-controlled chemicals. And those sophisticated capacities allow them, as Kavinvadee said, or as the DSG said, to essentially synthesize their own chemicals as a start towards methamphetamine or other synthetic drugs. So they've really been able to think through the problem and source high volumes of chemicals to get into the production areas. And to put it in perspective, they seized 171.5 at a minimum tons of drugs of methamphetamine last year. To produce that, you would need 1,000 tons, couple thousand tons, excuse me, of chemicals to get in. That's a freight train of chemicals, freight trains of chemicals to get in, and that's what's seized. If that's representative of what, 10%, 15%, imagine, 10 of those large convoys of chemicals. It's just huge volumes of chemicals are moving essentially unimpeded, as we see from the data. Nothing is being seized. And yet the profile of the drugs is extremely clear. Pseudoephedrine, ephedrine, P2P, none of which are being seized. So I think we really have to address this issue in this region.
Gwen, you have the last question. Yes.
Thanks, Gwen Robinson, Nikkei. Actually, it's a different question, but can I just follow up on what you just said, Jeremy? Any of those chemicals are illegal?
No.
Right. So why would they be seized if they're?
Exactly.
How can you seize them?
And that's the question which governments have. What do we do about this problem? Because they're not internationally controlled. Right. They don't have to, and industry does not have to declare shipments of them as they make them. That said, there have been a couple of major seizures of them, with one of which was with our help, because we got called for advice and advised a government, Laos, to seize some chemicals because they're on an international surveillance list. That was a one-off occurrence because they just randomly called us not knowing what this particular chemical was. So we advised them. They stopped it. It's now being destroyed. But the fact is that they don't have to. So these things just generally are freely traded. Yes. Industry is highly resistant to regulation, as you know, because it might add to costs in the bottom line. And there's no interest in regional industry in having additional regulatory measures in place to address those chemical flows. And they're putting up a fight. Countries at the moment at the global level are debating this, and they're trying to come up with a framework to increase surveillance monitoring, maybe some reporting, but there's resistance, and there's no consensus amongst countries to do this yet.
Right. Can I ask, how do you justify seizure of a massive amount of legal chemical? What was the charge?
It was easy in this case because it went from China to Thailand to Laos, and it was on its way to the special regions of Myanmar through the Mekong River. And we simply asked, Laos could not essentially seize it, as you say, it's legal. However, it wasn't declared to a government that it was being imported. It was one of the special regions issued their own import documents, not Naypyidaw did not issue import documents. A special region did. We simply told the Lao authorities to essentially trick them, which is to ask the end receiver what the legitimate use was, if they could declare it, and had they consulted with the actual central government of the country. They went quiet. As soon as they went quiet, they disavowed the shipment, and it was seized. So it was stopped by default, in a sense.
Okay, thank you. A slightly grey legal area.
Very grey.
It has to be said.
Very.
My question is completely different. It has to do with your phrase, your mention of on-the-ground conditions in Myanmar, in relation also to Cambodia. But in Myanmar, the main trend, as we all know, in the last 16 months has been a massive escalation of conflict, particularly military attacks throughout the country, but particularly in the areas, some of the areas you're focusing on with the drug production. Do you see any link between drug production and trafficking out of Myanmar with the conflict? And secondly, we've discussed this before in some of your excellent panels. Is there any new insights into whether there are any linkages with junta security forces, police or military, in that trade or production? Thanks.
Right. You can't draw a straight line from a shipment that is seized to a particular actor in some instances, but the 13% of drugs that were seized with different packaging and different markings is very telling, because those 13%, if you look at who made up that 13%, that's different militias and armed groups, some of which are PMFs, People's Militia Forces, some of which are independent ethnic armed groups. So the point being that there are groups on both sides of this issue, if you want to call it that, the conflict, if you want to call it that, that are in the drug tableting or production business. And then you have the big players, the WA, the UWSA, the MNDAA, the tablet, and the 999 and the Y1, and are associated with those groups very clearly for many, many years. So the point being that there are big groups which are involved in conflict. Now, why the sudden increase in production of tablets? It's very quick, easy money. And of course, this is how a lot of the groups, especially the smaller ones, they don't have other finance options, would finance themselves. So for them, this was a chance to finance. And what do they finance once they get the money? Themselves, the infrastructure that they have, their group, the arms that they might need to maintain themselves in a conflict environment.
Thank you. We still have a few questions online, but I think, do you want to take more, or this is it, we have time for now?
Sorry? One more?
Okay, maybe one.
Can you take one more?
Sure. We
Okay.
can do some offline as well, if you wish.
Yeah,
one-on-one.
sure. Yes, please.
Okay, sure. Just very quickly, there's going to be a change coming into effect in Thailand's cannabis laws. What potential problems, or do you see any potential problems for that? Anything that concerns you?
For the cannabis laws, from our side? Well, so far maybe the DSG wants to comment on that more than I do, but I don't foresee a big issue at the moment. What we've seen is medical cannabis. There's been this talk in the media of cannabis cultivation and commercial cannabis, but really at the moment it's medical cannabis, which is allowable under the international conventions. Any country can have medical cannabis. If there's a different change, which is to have commercialized sale and export of cannabis, then that's a different issue, and that might put any country that does it at odds with the international legal frameworks. Where I'm from, Canada has done it, and there were quote-unquote observations on the Canadian legal change, but at the end of the day, a sovereign member state can essentially proceed to do as they so choose to have a policy framework that they feel fits for them. So we're in a wait and see mode with Thailand to see where this goes. And so far, working closely with ONCB, we're assured that more or less medical cannabis will be allowable and commercial trade will not proceed at this point. But that's what we've been told so far.
Okay. All right. Great. I think this is that's all the question we have time for today. We are approaching to the end of the event, and I have a few things to address here. First, the report can be downloaded online from the UNODC regional website, and also will be available later today through the global UNODC website. And secondly, today we have heard some very interesting information and comments covering data up to 2021, and we have heard several key changes and the latest trends of the synthetic drug situation in East and Southeast Asia. So I'd like to thank all the speakers, Mr. Jeremy, Kun Kavinvadee, and especially Deputy Secretary General Thanakorn. Your presence here with us is highly appreciated, and I think we should get them a round of applause. And the last bit, I'd like to thank everyone who is watching us online. And on that note, I wish everyone a lovely and great day ahead. Thank you very much. ขอบคุณค่ะ